In one breathtaking moment, everything changed. Lindsay Chu, an unstoppable cleaner with a heart as fierce as her will, risked it all to save a man on the brink. And in an astonishing twist that no one saw coming, this wasn't just any man. It was a powerful CEO whose secret world of wealth and influence collided with her humble existence. Prepare to be shocked and swept away by the most incredible, heart-pounding union ever witnessed. Tonight, however, a different energy buzzed in the air. Lindsay had just finished hurriedly packing up her little stall when an unsettling commotion reached her ears. It started with raised voices near the glass doors of a five-star hotel across the street. A charity auction was taking place inside, rumored to include everything from rare jewelry to an opulent, one-of-a-kind perfume, though that perfume's exact identity was a mystery to most onlookers. Lindsay, her curiosity piqued, found herself trailing the crowd that was rushing in. She had no invitation, no formal attire, and certainly no illusions that she belonged among the city's social elite. Yet something told her to follow. She slipped into the hotel's grand foyer, skirting around waitstaff carrying silver trays and throngs of wealthy bidders in formal gowns. Mrs. Jackson, in the distance, furious.
"Where did that wild girl go? She just broke my one-of-a-kind perfume. Don't let her leave until she's paid me back. Every last cent of that $10 million.
At that fiery exclamation, Lindsay's head snapped toward the row of security guards. A young woman in battered sneakers and a t-shirt was desperately dodging the men in black suits. In the woman's haste, she bumped a gilded display podium, and the priceless bottle from the auction toppled to the floor, shattering into countless shards. The crowd gasped as the fragments sparkled under the chandelier lights. Lindsay tried to back away quietly, not wanting to get tangled in the chaos, when suddenly the fleeing woman collided with her. They stumbled together, nearly knocking over another display. Security was instantly on them, closing in like hounds. In that same heartbeat, another figure emerged, stealthily taking Lindsay's hand and guiding her away from the pandemonium. This tall, broad-shouldered stranger wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His grip was firm but not cruel, and Lindsay found herself rushing after him down a narrow hallway behind the ballroom. She had no chance to protest. Lindsay, breathless.
"Hey, who are you, and where are you taking me?"
Henry Jackson, grinning under his cap.
"If you want to avoid paying $10 million for that perfume, I suggest you keep running."
They dashed toward a service elevator. The door slid closed just in time, separating them from furious voices echoing in the corridor. When the elevator reached the parking level, the stranger guided her out to a battered sedan. Henry, turning to her with measured calm.
"Look, I just did you a favor. We can't stay here all night, so either hop in or you can try your luck with Mrs. Jackson's security again."
Still dazed, Lindsay slid into the passenger seat. She was certain this man had saved her from the harsh penalty of paying for that perfume, but she also had no idea who he was, why he wore such old jeans, or how he had such precise knowledge of the hotel's back halls. Before she could gather her thoughts, the car sped onto the main road, weaving through LA traffic. His real name, she'd soon learn, was Henry Jackson. But in that moment, he introduced himself with a wry half-smile as a mere day laborer who had lost his job at a construction site. Lindsay couldn't shake the suspicion that there was more to his story. Yet they had bigger issues. The woman whose perfume was destroyed was none other than Mrs. Jackson, a formidable matriarch rumored to hold the majority stake in a major corporation called the Jackson Corporation. $10 million was the claimed worth of the broken bottle. $10 million that, apparently, the fleeing woman, and now Lindsay, had to reimburse. When Henry abruptly pulled up outside a small county clerk's office, Lindsay's jaw nearly dropped.
"What are we doing at a government building, and how do we plan to handle that $10 million debt?"
"I told you, I've got a plan. Let's go inside."
Inside, they made a beeline for the desk that processed marriage licenses. It happened so quickly that Lindsay barely registered the clerk's tired monotone. "Raise your right hand. Do you take this man as your husband?" She was too stunned to answer until Henry nudged her, whispering, "If you marry me, I'll handle that debt."
"You'd pay it off? With what money? You're a construction worker with no job."
Trust me.
Overcome by the surreal moment and equally motivated by self-preservation, Lindsay found herself muttering, "I do." The clerk stamped documents, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered, and just like that, they were legally bound. Joint debt, joint responsibility, as Henry so brightly put it. Henry reasoned that as a married couple, they could figure out a plan to repay or negotiate the debt. The logic was upside down, but her life had already pivoted the second she stepped foot in that hotel. The next day, Henry followed Lindsay home to her tiny rented apartment in a quieter suburb east of downtown. The building was a drab, aging structure with peeling paint and dim hallways. Lindsay had, however, managed to fill her one bedroom with personal touches: a small purple couch, a bookshelf brimming with perfumery reference guides, and an improvised workstation for mixing essential oils. Henry seemed amused by the cramped living conditions. He offered to pay for dinner, but his wallet contained only a few rumpled bills.
I told you, I just lost my job, but I can cook something if you've got ingredients.
Lindsay, rolling her eyes.
We can survive on cheaper groceries. Also, I need to get ready for my night stall. I still have to sell my handmade perfumes on weekends. I can't lose that income.
Henry helped her break down cardboard boxes to create signage for her mini-street stall. He tried to joke about their new marriage of convenience, but Lindsay barely cracked a smile. The stress of a potential $10 million fiasco overshadowed everything. It was only the next morning, while rummaging for bread in the kitchen, that Lindsay discovered something odd. Henry received a call from a man who addressed him as Mr. Jackson and pleaded, "Sir, the board meeting is about to start. Are you sure you won't attend?" Henry swiftly ended the call, muttering about how telemarketers always find new ways to annoy him. She might have dismissed it, but the man's words sounded far too formal, not like any telemarketer she'd ever known. Some days passed in relative peace. Lindsay returned to her day job, an internship in the fragrance department at Jackson Corporation. Yes, the very conglomerate rumored to be owned by Mrs. Jackson, the woman whose perfume was shattered. The corporation owned multiple businesses across the West Coast, from cosmetics lines to real estate developments. Lindsay had studied perfumery and aroma chemistry for years, and she'd finally landed an intern role. She was determined to pass the intern evaluation to become a full-time perfumer. But the atmosphere at work had grown tense. A rumor circulated that the CEO of Jackson Corporation was on the warpath due to the destroyed perfume at the charity auction. Janet Brown, fellow intern, eyeing Lindsay's modest outfit.
I heard the top boss is furious about some fiasco. Don't you have any inside scoop, Lindsay? You always have that dreamy look, like you know secrets.
Please, Janet. I'm barely holding on to this internship. If I can't pass the final evaluation, I'll be back on the street with my knockoff stall in no time.
Well, I'm just warning you. Rumor says Director Zimmerman singled you out to handle a tricky client. Watch your back.
Indeed, that very afternoon, the middle-aged, hard-nosed Director Zimmerman summoned Lindsay to his office. He tossed a thick folder onto his mahogany desk. Within were details about the Anman Hotel chain, one of Jackson Corporation's major potential partners for a new custom fragrance line. A deal worth millions.
Miss Q, if you're so determined to become a full-time employee, prove yourself. Secure the Anman Hotel contract. If you fail, consider your internship terminated.
Lindsay, clutching the folder.
Yes, Director. I'll give it everything I have.
As she left his office, Janet Brown peeked from behind a cubicle, a sneer curling her lip. It was clear that a more sinister plan was brewing. The Anman Hotel project was notorious. 3 different employees had tried and failed to land the contract. One even quit from the stress. Another rumor said the procurement director at Anman was a lecherous type who harassed female staff. Now, that impossible task was shoved onto Lindsay. That evening, Lindsay told Henry about the new assignment while they ate on the cramped balcony. She found him oddly supportive. Henry, raising an eyebrow.
A big contract like that. Are you sure your boss isn't setting you up to fail?
Of course I suspect that. But I can't give up now. This is my best shot at going full-time, or else I can't pay off that debt with your mother's perfume fiasco.
Do what you must. If you run into trouble, call me.
Still, she had no idea how Henry could possibly help. He was supposedly jobless. Why did he keep saying he could protect her? Despite the ominous rumors, Lindsay arrived at the Onman Hotel corporate office a few days later to meet with the infamous Mr. Sun, their procurement director. She presented the potential fragrances she'd formulated, each tailored to Onman's various luxury themes. At first, Mr. Sun listened with moderate interest, but soon enough, his gaze drifted from the presentation slides to Lindsay's figure. Mr. Sun, leaning too close.
Your proposal is decent, but let's discuss something more personal over dinner,
Lindsay's stomach knotted. She felt her phone buzz inside her purse, a text message from Henry. Call me if you need me. Yet pride told her she ought to finalize this deal herself. So she forced a polite smile, hoping to turn the conversation back to fragrance metrics, distribution channels, anything. Mr. Sun only grew more insistent, his eyes gleaming with predatory interest. That night, to her deep discomfort, Mr. Sun insisted on meeting at a lounge. She braced herself. He greeted her with an expensive bottle of wine, his arm sliding around her waist as he tried to pour her a drink. Mr. Sun, chuckling menacingly.
Relax, Miss Q. You said you'd do anything for this contract, right?
Before Lindsay could wriggle free, an enraged voice cut across the lounge. Henry, furious.
Let her go now.
Henry was there, though how he found her so quickly she couldn't guess. He seized Mr. Sun's collar, eyes flashing with indignation. Though not especially tall or muscle-bound, Henry radiated a natural authority. With surprising ease, he forced the older man away from Lindsay. Mr. Sun, gasping wide-eyed.
Who do you think you are? I can kill this contract in a heartbeat.
But Henry's glare remained unwavering. For the first time, Lindsay felt safe around him. She noticed how Mr. Sun's defiance melted into panic when he realized Henry wasn't bluffing. Something about Henry's demeanor, like a lion protecting its pride, quieted all resistance.
Touch her again and see what happens.
Mr. Sun nearly tripped over himself in his haste to flee. His parting words were a sputter of curses. Lindsay wanted to demand answers from Henry, how he knew where she was, why he cared so much. But everything was too chaotic. She found herself leaning on him, her hands trembling. Late that night, they returned to her apartment. Lindsay's mind reeled from the confrontation, but Henry seemed oddly calm. Lindsay, voice quivering.
I never asked you to come. Why risk yourself?
Even if you didn't ask, I won't stand by while some jerk corners my friend.
His near slip made her heart pound. Indeed, they were married, on paper. But that was a hasty legal trick. Was it possible Henry truly cared? When she turned away to hide her confusion, she caught sight of an expensive-looking phone Henry had left charging. Its background wallpaper displayed the swirling golden logo of the Jackson Corporation. She realized in a flash it was the same emblem carved into the giant pillars outside the corporation's building. Questions swarmed in her head again, but Henry abruptly pocketed the phone before she could comment. The next morning, Lindsay went to the Jackson Corporation branch office with determination. She marched into Director Zimmerman's area to deliver her revised proposal. The entire office was abuzz with tension. Someone had messed up a different high-profile perfume launch. An expensive fiasco had cost the company huge potential revenue. Janet Brown, whispering to a colleague,
I heard a big star got an allergic reaction because the formula had a banned ingredient. The perfumer who messed it up is done for.
Amid the rumor mill, Lindsay worked on her computer, finalizing every detail of her prospective pitch for Onman Hotel. She was sure Mr. Sun would be replaced or overshadowed by new management who were more open to a real deal. If only she could hang on long enough to prove her worth. Suddenly, an urgent summons echoed. All employees to the main conference room, immediately. Lindsay looked around at the anxious faces. She joined the hushed, tense crowd, finding seats before a podium at the front. A man with strong features and impeccable posture stepped forward, the same man who had come to her rescue the night before. Only now he was dressed in a tailored suit. Every eye turned to him. Mr. Carter, the assistant, clearing his throat.
Everyone, this is Mr. Henry Jackson, our acting CEO, back from the head office.
A collective gasp rippled through the employees. Lindsay felt her pulse thunder in her ears.
We have discovered certain individuals tampering with a key perfume formula, leading to an unauthorized banned ingredient. The person behind this sabotage attempted to shift blame to others. But as of this morning, we have conclusive evidence.
He played security footage showing the actual switch of formula sheets at a desk in the lab. The saboteur, Janet Brown, was clearly visible in the act. There was no doubt. As the images flickered on the screen, Janet trembled, eyes darting about in panic.
Effective immediately, Janet Brown is terminated. She will be held liable for damages. The perfumer who originally created the correct formula.
He paused, letting the tension build, then fixed his gaze directly on Lindsay.
Is Lindsay Chu. She is officially reinstated and promoted to full-time perfumer with immediate effect.
An uproar of whispers and applause broke out. Lindsay felt dazed as relief crashed over her, yet she couldn't tear her eyes from Henry's face. So this was the truth. The day laborer she had married was in fact the new top executive of Jackson Corporation. Moments later, as the crowd dispersed, Henry approached Lindsay. She clenched her fists, not sure whether to yell or cry.
You let me believe you were broke. You made me marry you under false pretenses, Henry. Do you realize how cruel that is?
I never meant to deceive you. I've been burned so many times by people chasing my family's money. I wanted someone who saw me for who I am. I'm sorry.
But Lindsay, her emotions a storm, could only stare. The brilliance of Henry's suit, the hush that fell when employees realized the CEO was personally talking to her, none of it felt real.
Well, Mr. Jackson, at least you helped me keep my job. But now I'm in your debt, again.
Her voice wavered with sarcasm and unspoken hurt. She turned on her heel and left him standing there, the clang of her footsteps echoing across the glass-floored lobby. If only the ground would swallow her whole. She needed space to absorb this revelation. Her so-called struggling husband was the wealthy heir she had feared, or perhaps hoped, he might be. Yet, as Chapter 1 of their tangled story concluded, one thing was certain. Their tenuous arrangement was no longer just about money or a hasty deal to dodge a lawsuit. Shadows of deeper affection and deeper betrayal loomed on the horizon, waiting to test both their hearts and their ideals in the City of Angels. Lindsay Chu, a talented but financially struggling Chinese immigrant, suddenly finds herself married to a construction worker who is secretly Henry Jackson, the CEO of Jackson Corporation. She's framed at work, only to learn that the quiet, helpful man at her side holds more power and wealth than she ever imagined. Resentment and sparks of attraction mingle as the question arises, can their relationship survive the truth? A restless hush fell upon Jackson Corporation's Los Angeles branch. Days after Henry Jackson, secretly the CEO, had reinstated Lindsay Chu and exposed the sabotage against her perfume, the office still buzzed with incredulous whispers. Janet Brown's abrupt termination, combined with the revelation that Henry was more than a simple construction worker, left employees off balance. Despite the victory, Lindsay felt no relief. The deception surrounding Henry's true identity weighed on her heart. Yes, he had saved her career, but at a cost. She no longer knew if their short, impulsive marriage was built on trust or a lie. She avoided his calls and left the office at odd hours, hoping to sidestep any tense confrontations. Lindsay tried throwing herself into her work to move on. She pored over new fragrance initiatives, desperate to prove her worth independent of Henry's influence. One morning, she found a thick folder dropped onto her desk. A new assignment from Director Zimmerman, the same tough-eyed manager who had first tested her.
Miss Chu, I need fresh proposals on personal fragrances, something that can outshine everything else on the market. Incorporate unique American-themed elements. Maybe draw on the California coast, the wildfires issue, anything that resonates with the public right now. We want to stand apart from the usual floral scents.
Lindsay nodded, scribbling notes, trying to keep her expression calm. In the hush that followed, she sensed the weight of this new assignment. If she excelled, Perhaps she'd move up the corporate ladder. If she failed, she might be discarded. After all, the industry was famously cutthroat. That evening, while she tinkered with vials of rose absolute and musky undertones, a quiet rap on the lab door startled her. She set her pipette down and carefully opened the door to find Henry Jackson standing there, his usually confident aura somewhat subdued. Henry softly,
I know you're mad, but can we talk for a moment?
Lindsay looking away.
I'm busy. We can speak at the next staff meeting if it's about work.
Henry stepping inside.
It's not about work. It's about us.
Lindsay braced herself, inhaling the faint notes of the test perfumes swirling around them. The lab's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, refusing to meet his eyes.
What more is there to say? You fooled me from the start. I can't just forget that.
I had my reasons for hiding my identity. You might think it's ridiculous, but in my world, no one sees the real me. They only see the Jackson name.
She wanted to lash out, but something in his raw tone softened her. Her arms loosened around the perfume blotter in her hand. She stared at the floor, the conflict roiling inside her.
You let me think we were both broke, struggling. Then you show up, CEO of everything. You made me feel like a complete fool.
I'm sorry, I was wrong. Let me make it up to you any way I can.
His remorse felt genuine, and that frightened her more than his lie. It reminded her how, deep down, she might still love him. She swallowed hard and forced her emotions aside.
I'm too overwhelmed to handle this. I need time. I can't just slip back into your arms like nothing happened.
She turned away, picking up her pipette and forcing herself to focus on the mixture at hand, tears threatening behind her eyes. Henry exhaled slowly.
I understand. I won't push you. But if you ever need me, call day or night.
He left quietly, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the corridor. Lindsay, alone at last, leaned on the lab counter, trembling. She found no comfort in her test fragrances, only an ache in her heart. The next morning, Henry faced a different challenge. Mrs. Jackson, his grandmother and the major shareholder in the company, summoned him to the Jackson family's Beverly Hills mansion. Massive white columns framed the entrance, and manicured lawns stretched for acres. Henry approached the foyer with a resigned sigh. His mother, Mrs. Regina Jackson, stood inside, greeting him with pursed lips. Mrs. Regina, quietly,
Your grandmother's in the drawing room. Be careful, she's upset.
Henry nodded, stepping across floors of gleaming marble. In the drawing room, a regal older woman in a designer suit stared at him with unwavering ice in her eyes. Margaret Jackson, matriarch of the family. Mrs. Margaret Jackson, tapping her cane.
Henry, you're back just in time. We have some important matters to discuss about your recent marriage fiasco.
He clenched his jaw, unwilling to break eye contact. He knew she disapproved of Lindsay.
I entrusted you with Jackson Corporation, but you're risking our reputation, carrying on with some unknown woman you plucked off the streets. You think that's acceptable?
She's my wife, Grandma, and she's not unknown. She's brilliant and talented. Without her, we would have lost a key fragrance project entirely.
His grandmother scowled.
I'm arranging a grand engagement banquet for you and Stella Yu next month. That's final.
Henry, voice rising.
You can't be serious. Stella Yu and I have nothing between us.
Her family is crucial for Jackson Corporation's upcoming expansions. You can do as I say, or I'll remove you as CEO. Don't forget how I came to hold the controlling shares after your father passed.
Henry felt his heart pound with anger. His mother, Regina, hovered by the door, wringing her hands but saying nothing to defend her son. It was always thus. The matriarch made the decisions, and everyone bowed to her demands. Henry, through clenched teeth,
You can do what you want with me, but I'm not ending my marriage. Ever.
A tense silence followed before Margaret Jackson exhaled sharply.
If you insist on defying me, you'll face the consequences. I won't stand by while you tarnish our family's legacy. Now get out. I have no more words for you.
He spun on his heel and left, ignoring Regina's plea of, Henry, please talk to her, as he strode down the corridor. His father's portrait, hung regally on the wall, stared back at him. Henry's chest tightened with old grief, but he refused to waver. He would not let his grandmother dictate his life's most intimate choice. 2 days later, the Jackson Corporation HR department announced a new senior manager for the West Coast division, Stella Yu, heiress of a wealthy Californian venture capital family. She stepped into the branch with impeccable posture, her designer heels clicking on the polished floor. Stella Yu, smiling.
Hello, everyone. I look forward to collaborating closely with you.
Employees fluttered with excitement. Stella was famed not just for her family's wealth, but her philanthropic presence at Hollywood galas. Rumors swirled that she'd returned from a sojourn in Europe purely to win over Henry Jackson. Worse, Stella possessed a cunning edge disguised by her graceful manners. From her new vantage point, Stella eyed Lindsay Chu with unmasked disdain. It took no time for Stella to call Lindsay to her corner office. Stella Yu, insincere politeness.
Lindsay, dear, I hear you're quite the fragrance expert. I'm curious about the next big campaign you're working on. Would you give me a brief?
Lindsay sensed the hostility behind Stella's bright smile. Nevertheless, she responded with measured courtesy. I'm developing a new line that focuses on region-inspired scents, coastal breezes, desert sage, maybe even referencing iconic American locales. Our brand needs a fresh identity. Stella Yu, tilting her head.
Sounds ambitious, but be careful not to aim too high and crash.
Lindsay bristled but held her tongue. Only later did she overhear Stella informing Director Zimmerman that they might reorganize the creative team if Lindsay's proposals fell short. The challenge was set. Stella wanted her gone. A week flew by. Henry scrambled to protect his standing in Jackson Corporation, while Grandma Margaret seemed eager to sabotage him. Tension built with each passing day. In a closed-door board meeting, Stella Yu sat near the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by older board members who seemed enthralled by her. Henry, for once, arrived late, looking worn from internal battles. Stella Yu, all smiles.
Since the success of our next fragrance is paramount, perhaps it's time I officially oversee that department. After all, synergy between management and perfumery is essential, isn't it?
A chorus of half-hearted nods rippled around the table. Henry eyed her suspiciously.
Oversee the fragrance department? That's a specialized area. With all due respect, Miss Yu, you've no background in perfumery.
But I have an excellent track record in brand development. And of course, the board can't ignore how beneficial an alliance with the Yu family might be.
Everyone understood the subtext. Stella's father controlled huge swaths of venture capital that Jackson Corporation needed for expansions on the East Coast. Margaret Jackson had likely orchestrated Stella's new role. Henry's protest could be easily overridden. Sure enough, the board quickly voted, all eyes on Henry as they approved Stella's move to oversee fragrance marketing. Henry's fists clenched under the table. Henry, quietly to Stella.
Stay away from Lindsay. This is between us.
She only returned a cunning smile, flicking a lock of perfect hair over her shoulder. Stella Yu, murmuring so only he could hear.
We'll see how long she lasts here, or in your life.
3 days later, at the end of a Friday workday, Lindsay prepared to leave the office. As she crossed the lobby, Stella Yu appeared from behind a pillar, an envelope in hand. Stella Yu, with mock sympathy.
I have something you should see. It's about you and Henry.
Stella shoved a set of photographs into Lindsay's hands. They showed Henry apparently close with another woman at a fancy penthouse, hugging, or so it seemed from the angle.
He's easily tempted, no? You know, men in high places rarely stay loyal. Maybe you should let go before he hurts you more.
Lindsay's heart pounded. The images were too dark and grainy to identify faces, but the man's stature resembled Henry's. Lindsay forced herself to stay calm. Something about these photos felt staged, like Stella's underhanded technique to undermine her confidence. Lindsay, steadying herself,
You can't fool me so easily. Henry's your real target. Maybe you should show these pictures to him.
Stella Yu, smirking.
You're naive, Lindsay. In time, you'll see you can't compete.
Stella swept off, leaving Lindsay clutching the envelope. Conflicted, she told herself Henry wouldn't cheat on her, yet the friction between them was undeniable. That evening, she locked the photos in her drawer, determined not to let Stella sow distrust. Time marched on, and the date for Jackson Corporation's major fragrance showcase loomed. Industry VIPs, local celebrities, and influencers were invited to witness the reveal of the new line. Lindsay, as the lead perfumer for these scents, worked day and night. If successful, it could launch her career to the next level and prove she stood on her own merits. But behind the scenes, Stella Yu looked for any excuse to sabotage her. On the afternoon of the showcase, an elegant stage was erected inside a posh event hall in Hollywood. Rows of white chairs faced a sleek runway, while press photographers set up along the sides. A hush of anticipation filled the space. Lindsay hovered near a table of her perfume samples, double-checking every detail. Henry stood a few yards away, scanning the crowd with an anxious expression. Moments before the event began, Stella Yu swanned over, flanked by camera crews. With a bright smile, she told the journalists how excited she was to usher in a new era for Jackson Corporation fragrance. Then, casually, she stepped close to Lindsay's display. Stella Yu, fake innocence.
Oh dear, Miss Chu, your production formula. Is it correct this time? You know how easy it is for mistakes to slip through.
Lindsay glared but refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she turned her attention to the stage, where Henry was stepping up to make an introductory speech. Microphone in hand, he cleared his throat. Henry, addressing the crowd.
Welcome, everyone, to the launch of our newest fragrance line. This represents the creativity and resilience of our entire team. You'll soon get to sample the distinct scents that we hope will capture the spirit of Los Angeles, from the Santa Monica coastline to the aroma of desert blooms.
He motioned for Lindsay to come forward. Cameras flashed as she did.
And I'd like to acknowledge the lead perfumer, Miss Lindsay Chu, whose talent and dedication brought this project to life.
Polite applause followed, though a few onlookers whispered about Henry's rumored romance with this new star perfumer. Lindsay politely bowed her head, her heart fluttering with pride. Suddenly, as the unveiling approached, chaos erupted on the sidelines. One of the PR assistants began coughing violently, pointing in horror at a perfume sample she'd just sniffed. PR assistant, panicked.
Mom, my throat, I can't breathe. It's burning.
Her face was flushed. Tears streamed down her cheeks. A swirl of alarmed voices rose from the crowd. Stella Yu rushed over with a look of shock, demanding to know if the perfume had triggered a dangerous reaction. A few reporters caught the story in real time, tweeting about a possible allergic meltdown at the Jackson fragrance launch. Lindsay's pulse raced. How could this happen again? She had triple-checked every ingredient. If something was tampered with, she sensed sabotage. Henry hurried to the PR assistant's side, guiding her to the paramedics who arrived from inside the venue. Henry, grim-faced to the audience.
Everyone remain calm. This is an unforeseen incident. We'll ensure our product meets the highest standards.
But an ominous murmur swept through the attendees. People wondered if a banned ingredient or toxic additive had slipped into the formula once more. An anchor from a local TV affiliate aimed her microphone at Lindsay. Reporter. Miss Chu, is your new fragrance to blame for this allergic reaction? Is Jackson Corporation launching a hazardous product? Lindsay's throat went dry. She scrambled to gather her thoughts.
Our formula was tested extensively by the lab. We'll investigate immediately. I believe in the safety of these perfumes.
Her voice, though trembling, held conviction. But glancing sideways, she caught a triumphant gleam in Stella Yu's eyes. Something wasn't right. The launch halted as paramedics escorted the PR assistant away. Henry instructed staff to hold off letting guests sample anything. Cameras flashed, capturing the fiasco. In a matter of minutes, the story began trending on social media under hashtags like #perfume debacle and #Jackson fragrance fail. Lindsay, feeling cornered, raced backstage. She pulled out the official lab reports, scanning them for anomalies. Everything matched her final version. No mention of irritants or banned elements. Could someone have tampered with the physical sample? Lindsay, muttering.
I relabeled these bottles personally. There's no mistake in the formula itself.
Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. She glanced up to see Stella Yu, arms folded, lips curved in a sly smile.
I told you not to aim too high. Looks like you're about to take a nasty fall, Miss Chu.
Lindsay, fighting tears.
I won't let you do this. This is my work, my entire future.
Stella rolled her eyes, looking bored.
Not my problem if your formula mysteriously changed. The board will blame you regardless. Henry will have no choice but to remove you from the project. Maybe even from the company.
Lindsay, voice quaking with emotion.
I don't understand what you gain by ruining Henry's product line. You claim to care about Jackson Corporation, but you're willing to sabotage its biggest launch of the year?
Stella scoffed, tapping a manicured finger against her phone screen.
When everything crashes, the board will accept my father's rescue funds. I'll look like the hero who steps in to keep the brand afloat. And Henry, let's just say he'll be so mired in crisis that he'll need a stable partner. Someone the family approves of.
A cold chill enveloped Lindsay. She realized that for Stella, the success or failure of any single fragrance campaign mattered far less than the broader scheme, control over Henry and the entire corporation. Stella turned on her heel and strode away, phone in hand, leaving Lindsay to stand amidst scattered perfume samples and tear-stained marketing briefs. Within the hour, an emergency board meeting was convened. Senior executives showed up in a flurry, many still in tuxedos or cocktail dresses from the aborted launch. Henry sat at the head of the table, arms crossed. Lindsay, asked to attend, stood near the back, trying not to fold under their piercing gazes. Margaret Jackson joined via video call, her stern face filling a large monitor. Stella took a seat, smoothing her hair primly, radiating confidence. Board Member 1, reading from a folder. The PR assistant is stable, but the hospital confirmed a chemical irritant in her system, something that might have come from that perfume sample. Board Member 2. We can't risk a class action lawsuit. We must recall any distributed samples immediately. Margaret Jackson's voice crackled from the speakers. Mrs. Margaret Jackson.
What do you propose, Henry? Our brand name is at stake. And that perfumer you're so fond of. How do we handle her negligence?
Henry rose, trying to keep his composure.
We don't have proof that Miss Chu was negligent. In fact, I trust her formula. We need an internal investigation to confirm sabotage before blaming her.
Stella feigned concern.
Even if there was sabotage, the public sees a pattern. A second allergic reaction fiasco involving Miss Q. That alone damages us.
So you're implying we fire an innocent employee, Miss Yu?
A hush fell. Margaret Jackson cleared her throat on the video call. Mrs. Margaret Jackson.
For the sake of the brand, a scapegoat might be necessary. If Miss Chu truly had no part in the sabotage, let her prove it. Otherwise, her position becomes untenable.
Lindsay's heart hammered. She couldn't lose her job again under false accusations. With a surge of courage, she stepped forward.
I will prove I had nothing to do with this. Allow me just a few days. If I can't produce undeniable evidence of foul play, I'll resign.
Everyone's eyes shifted. Stella Yu wore a victorious smirk. Henry's expression flashed with worry, though he kept silent, knowing Lindsay's pride was on the line. That night, Lindsay dragged her feet to the old one-bedroom apartment she now rented alone. She had insisted Henry not stay there after the big reveal. She wasn't ready to forgive him. Outside, the neon city lights of LA winked in a haze, a swirl of color under the inky sky. She collapsed onto her worn couch, burying her face in her hands. The stakes loomed. She could lose everything she'd fought for. A battered phone on the table buzzed. She picked it up to see a text from Henry. "Call me. I have a lead." Wavering, she dialed. His concerned voice greeted her.
"I spoke to an internal contact at the lab. They suspect the sample was swapped. If so, there's likely a sign-in record or security footage."
Lindsay clutched the phone, her breath unsteady.
Then we need to check those logs and tapes. Stella's not going to let me waltz in and rummage for proof.
"Leave that part to me. But be careful. My grandmother and Stella, they'll do anything to keep control."
A swirl of complex emotions welled in her chest. She hated that Henry's hidden identity had caused her so much pain, yet he was offering help when no one else would. Maybe, just maybe, he did care more about her than she realized. Henry arranged a clandestine visit to the Jackson Corporation R&D facility at midnight, using his CEO access to bypass certain security measures. Lindsay arrived dressed in black sweats, hair tucked in a ball cap. She felt her pulse thrum as they slipped inside the quiet building. Overhead lights flickered in standby mode, casting eerie shadows across the tiled halls. They reached the small lab security room. Henry tapped at the computer terminal, typing in a series of override codes. Lindsay hovered at his shoulder. Lindsay, whispering.
I can't believe we're sneaking around like spies.
He offered her a wry half-smile. Henry, quietly.
"If Stella or my grandmother found out, they'd shut us down. But we'll get that footage."
The computer whirred to life, opening the archived camera feeds from the day before the showcase. They scrolled through hours of silent video. Close to 2 a.m., a figure appeared in the hallway outside the fragrance storage room, wearing a Jackson Corporation custodial uniform. The person used a keycard, entered, then emerged a minute later carrying a box. Henry paused, zooming in. The quality was grainy, but the silhouette looked suspiciously like a woman in heels. Under the uniform's pant legs, you could see slender ankles perched on stiletto-like footwear.
"A custodian wearing high heels?"
He advanced frame by frame. Suddenly, the figure turned her head slightly. The camera caught a partial glimpse of finely coiffed hair. It was enough to suggest the presence of someone far too fashion-conscious to be a normal night janitor. Lindsay's stomach lurched. Stella Yu's distinctive hairstyle was recognizable to those who worked with her daily, yet the footage wasn't crystal clear. She exhaled, dread and hope mixing in equal measure.
This proves she or someone working for her swapped my samples with a tampered version.
Henry nodded, copying the video onto a flash drive. Satisfied but tense, they left the building the same way they came in, hearts pounding. Outside, the LA night air felt strangely cold. Henry, turning to Lindsay.
"We have something, but the board might demand more conclusive evidence, like the key card used. That data might be stored in the building's cloud."
Lindsay sighed wearily.
One battle at a time. Let's start with this. In any case, if we can show it to the board, they'll know I'm innocent.
They lingered there under a flickering streetlight, an awkward hush between them. Finally, Henry spoke, voice low.
"Thank you for letting me help. I never wanted to hurt you."
Her eyes flicked to the sidewalk, a swirl of unspoken feelings in her chest.
Let's just focus on clearing my name, and we can talk about us later.
He nodded. No matter how wide the rift between them felt, fate kept throwing them back together. Now, with this new evidence, maybe they could turn the tide in their favor, if Stella's next move didn't destroy them first. A stifling hush shrouded Los Angeles in the hours after Lindsay and Henry's secret late-night visit to the Jackson Corporation lab. The palm trees lining the wide boulevards cast flickering shadows in the moonlight, as though uneasy spirits watched the drama unfold. Despite the city's bright facade, the final showdown was taking shape behind locked boardroom doors and hidden alliances. By morning, the skies were pale gold, and a warm breeze rolled off the Pacific. Lindsay Chu arrived at the office discreetly, wearing a simple black jacket and jeans rather than her usual business attire. In her purse, she guarded the flash drive containing the partial video of Stella Yu, or someone suspiciously like her, sneaking into the fragrance storeroom. Her heart pounded at the thought of what might happen if this evidence still wasn't enough. A single piece of fuzzy footage might fail to convince the board, especially if powerful interests worked against her. She took a breath, summoning courage. This was her chance, perhaps her final one, to preserve her career and, just maybe, salvage her relationship with Henry. It was unusually quiet on the 17th floor, where the fragrance division resided. Small clusters of employees whispered near cubicles, casting pitying looks at Lindsay when they caught sight of her. A rumor was circulating that the board planned to call an emergency disciplinary hearing that same day, and that Stella Yu had personally filed a motion to fire Lindsay on grounds of repeated negligence. Lindsay set her jaw and slipped into the small security review suite, a side room lined with monitors. She had asked a single trusted colleague, Alicia Carter, to meet her there. Alicia was a sharp-minded quality control analyst of African American heritage who had quietly mentored Lindsay in corporate processes. Together, they intended to gather any final data needed to strengthen the case against Stella. Inside that cramped room, they reviewed access logs from the laboratory. Over the hum of computer fans, Lindsay explained how she believed Stella or her henchman used a stolen keycard to tamper with the fragrance. Alicia frowned as she cross-referenced files, her polished nails tapping the keyboard. Alicia, softly.
There it is. A keycard assigned to janitorial staff floater #4. But the digital signature was used after hours on the same night your sample was swapped.
She pointed to a column of data showing the lock's timestamps. Each matched the suspicious camera footage. A surge of relief mixed with adrenaline coursed through Lindsay's veins. The caretaker's keycard had been swiped at 2:01 a.m., precisely when the figure wearing heels was recorded on video. With luck, these logs and the flash drive footage would form the proof she so desperately needed. Just as Alicia saved the final log to a second USB drive, an alert flashed on Lindsay's phone, a mass email from Jackson Corporation's administrative team. All relevant parties, including Lindsay, were summoned to a formal board session at noon in the executive conference hall on the 20th floor. The subject line read, "Urgent hearing regarding fragrance tampering incident." Although her stomach churned at the timing, she pressed her lips into a determined line. There was no more time to hesitate. Clutching both USB drives, one with the video, one with the lock logs, Lindsay thanked Alicia for her help. Alicia nodded encouragingly. Alicia, reassuring,
I've got your back. Show them the truth.
At midday, the executive conference hall pulsed with tension. Beneath the glass skylights, a row of stern-faced board members waited alongside Margaret Jackson, who occupied the seat of honor. Her distinguished silver hair and rigid posture emanated authority. Stella Yu sat to Margaret's immediate right, wearing a fitted white dress, her expression composed yet watchful. Several senior vice presidents flanked the long table, scripts and binders arranged meticulously before them. In contrast, Henry Jackson stood near the head of the table, arms folded. He offered Lindsay a subtle nod as she entered. She acknowledged him briefly, but focused on the heavy atmosphere, determined not to let personal emotions intrude. The meeting began with formalities. Margaret Jackson cleared her throat, her voice echoing in the polished room.
We are convened to address the sabotage incident at the fragrance product launch. Allegations have implicated Miss Lindsay Chu. We will consider the evidence and any rebuttals promptly.
There was little fanfare. Stella Yu, in her role as an overseeing manager, took the lead in summarizing the problem. Her voice dripped with polite concern. She recounted the allergic reaction fiasco, the repeated brand damage, and the purported involvement of inadequate formula checks. Subtly, she emphasized the notion that, unfortunately, Miss Chu's work has been associated with earlier issues, painting a picture of gross incompetence. Despite her calm veneer, Stella's eyes glinted with triumph. Lindsay felt her pulse racing. This was precisely the condemnation she had feared, but now she held something to counter it. When Stella finished, Henry stepped forward, tension evident in his posture. Rather than speak, he glanced toward Lindsay. She moved to the central screen with her USB drive. Clearing her throat, she explained that she had fresh evidence to present. First, the security footage from the corridor outside the fragrance storeroom. Second, digital records revealing the stolen custodian keycard used at the suspicious hour. She inserted the USB into a port and clicked to play the relevant clip on the large wall monitor. The video showed the figure in a janitor's uniform, walking unsteadily, likely because the person wore hidden heels that didn't match the outfit. Although the quality was grainy, the silhouette's frame was unmistakably slender and tall, with a trademark tilt of the head that matched Stella's poised gait. A muted murmur rose among the board members. Margaret Jackson leaned forward, narrowing her eyes at the screen. A few directors swapped perplexed looks. Some displayed open astonishment. Then came the second piece of data, a spreadsheet of keycard entries pointing out how the floater #4 ID had been deactivated a day later at Stella Yu's request, allegedly because it was never needed. The timestamp overlapped exactly with the bizarre movements caught on video. Lindsay concluded her presentation with a quiet but resolute statement. "I have never used or possessed that keycard. This data suggests the card was exploited by someone else. The resulting tampering caused the irritant to be added to my fragrance sample, leading to the allergic reaction." She calmly set the remote aside, stepping back. Stella Yu, visibly rattled, tried to maintain composure. She attempted to dismiss the footage as inconclusive and labeled it the product of desperate scapegoating. Yet her usual smooth confidence was cracking. The replay of the figure's posture and distinctive hairstyle had not gone unnoticed by the watchful eyes at the table. Margaret Jackson fixed her granddaughter-in-law candidate with a penetrating gaze, waiting to see how Stella would respond. Some tension flickered in the matriarch's eyes, as though she feared this development would unravel her carefully planned union. Stella's voice wavered, an edge of desperation creeping in. She claimed that someone else must have orchestrated this to implicate her, but the evidence was stronger than anyone expected. The board members, usually docile under the Jackson family's sway, shifted in their seats, uncertain about Stella's innocence. It was at that moment that Regina Jackson, Henry's mother, unexpectedly rose from her place at the far end of the table. Regina had always been overshadowed by Margaret's controlling presence. On this day, her mild demeanor fell away, replaced by fierce resolve. With measured steps, Regina moved to the center of the conference room. Her voice was calm, yet carried conviction. Regina Jackson, addressing the board.
"I have further information relevant to this matter."
She laid out a packet of printed documents, explaining that she had discovered additional logs from the building's Wi-Fi system. A device associated with Stella Yu's personal cell phone had connected to the fragrance storeroom's internal sensor at 2:07 a.m., the same time frame captured on camera. This silent, automatically recorded data left little doubt that Stella herself had been in the restricted area. Many in attendance gasped softly. Stella's face paled, and the tightness around her mouth revealed mounting panic. Margaret Jackson, seated near the head, fixed her daughter-in-law with a cold, questioning look, clearly alarmed by this blow. Regina continued, her voice unwavering. "This proof suggests Miss Yu carried out deliberate sabotage, endangering Jackson Corporation's reputation and the well-being of our staff." She ended by emphasizing that, as Henry's mother, she had a responsibility to speak the truth, even if it collided with her own mother-in-law's preferences. A wave of restless murmuring rippled around the table. Several board members demanded Stella explain herself. She faltered badly, stammering as her usual deflections rang hollow. At last, someone quietly proposed a motion to suspend Stella pending a comprehensive investigation. Henry Jackson, seizing his chance to protect Lindsay, addressed the board with composure.
"It is clear Miss Chu was the victim of malicious interference. I trust the board to recognize her innocence and reinstate her with full support. Furthermore, I ask that we conduct a thorough review of Miss Yu's actions, as well as any other party involved."
Eyes turned toward Margaret Jackson, the ultimate authority in corporate matters. She pressed her lips together, the tension in her posture radiating frustration. For a long moment, she seemed to weigh her family's aspirations against the glaring facts in front of her. But the evidence was undeniable, and with the entire board watching, Margaret could not shield Stella this time. She gave a brusque nod, apparently conceding to the weight of truth. Before the board could disband, Margaret Jackson spoke again, her tone brisk but wavering. "Since my granddaughter-in-law candidate has proven less than trustworthy, I must respect my grandson's choice in marriage." She then locked eyes with Henry, adding, "However, I shall expect you both to fulfill your duties at Jackson Corporation responsibly. Any failure to do so, and I will not hesitate to exercise my controlling shares." That final statement made it clear Margaret wouldn't easily yield her power. Yet for the first time, she acknowledged Henry and Lindsay's marriage without scorn. Stella, on the other hand, looked furious. 2 security guards stepped forward, presumably to escort her out. She had lost the advantage, her scheme exposed for all to see. Hours later, Henry found Lindsay in the empty corridor by the tall windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Soft afternoon light tinted the glass walls golden, and the drone of traffic far below felt somehow distant. She stared out, shoulders trembling, relief mingling with exhaustion. He paused before speaking, then carefully placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch away as she once might have. He said very little, only a hushed apology for the lies that started them down this path, and a heartfelt thanks for trusting him enough to fight side by side. She allowed a small tear to escape, turning to face him. The reflections of the city glimmered in her eyes. In that vulnerable hush, they recognized how far they had come since the chaotic night of the perfume auction. From strangers tied by a bizarre debt, to newlyweds fumbling with secrets, to partners who had just stared down the entire Jackson empire. Words felt unnecessary in that moment. The summer months that followed carried the echoes of that fateful hearing. Stella Yu disappeared from Jackson Corporation's halls, her family cutting ties to avoid public scandal. The board quietly restructured, with Henry ascending to a more secure leadership role, albeit under his grandmother's watchful gaze. Margaret Jackson, in turn, receded from day-to-day oversight, her faith in Henry's abilities grudgingly increased by how he resolved the crisis. For Lindsay, a new chapter began. Cleared of wrongdoing, she was promoted to lead perfumer and given the freedom to craft innovative scents for the American market. Instead of fleeing back to the makeshift stall on LA streets, she spent her days in a luminous R&D lab, blending top-tier ingredients and training a young team of interns who admired her resilience. Occasionally, she thought back to the illusions that had governed her life. Henry's initial deception had wounded her, but it also led her to discover her own strength. Little by little, they repaired the trust between them. The old one-room apartment was exchanged for a modest 2-bedroom condo with a small balcony overlooking the shimmering city lights, purchased jointly, so that neither felt overshadowed by the other. They made no immediate plans for a grand wedding. Instead, they focused on day-to-day companionship. Lindsay insisted on contributing half the mortgage despite Henry's status, while Henry, in an understated display of affection, quietly settled the last vestiges of their mutual debt. Through these gestures, they built an equilibrium founded on honesty. One evening, a soft breeze blew in from the Santa Monica coastline, carrying a whisper of salt and sea. Henry and Lindsay ventured to the rooftop of Jackson Corporation's main tower, far above the shimmering lights of Los Angeles. They often stole moments there, away from the corporate chaos. Standing near the edge, they gazed over the sprawling city. Henry took Lindsay's hand, and with uncharacteristic nervousness, he told her how deeply he regretted his past secrecy. Without fanfare or audience, he slipped a modest ring from his pocket, far simpler than the grand diamond his family once tried to force on him. Symbolizing not wealth but their genuine bond, it sparkled quietly in the twilight. When he placed it on her finger, Lindsay felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, love, and a sense of freedom she once thought impossible. She recalled the dizzying start of their relationship, that surreal moment at the marriage license office. In this quiet, elevated space, a real vow took shape in her heart. They sealed the moment with a gentle kiss, the city's neon reflection dancing across the rooftop tiles. Neither needed to speak words of forever. The real promise was in the acceptance of each other's flaws and the unwavering commitment to move forward together. In time, the new line of Jackson Corporation fragrances, refined and relaunched under Lindsay's stewardship, received glowing reviews. They resonated with American consumers hungry for authenticity, tying bright Californian citrus notes to breezy ocean accords. Even rumors circulated that the brand's philanthropic expansions were helping to combat wildfire damage in rural areas, a cause Lindsay felt strongly about, given the region's challenges. No longer burdened by secrets, Lindsay found her creative spark blossoming. She even introduced a special edition perfume, inspired by her own journey from the modest stalls to the boardrooms of Los Angeles. The packaging bore a subtle insignia, an open door leading into light, symbolizing the leaps of faith that shape a life. Henry, now firmly established as CEO, navigated his grandmother's traditional expectations with newfound confidence. The board came to respect him for his balanced approach, one shaped by both the powerful resources of the Jackson Empire and the grounded humility he had learned through the most unexpected marriage imaginable. Margaret Jackson, though never an openly sentimental woman, seemed to allow for a quiet thaw in her stance. She refrained from forcing any more suitors upon her grandson, begrudgingly recognizing that her attempts to manipulate love and business had backfired. On select Sunday afternoons, she even shared polite tea with Lindsay, discussing new acquisitions or philanthropic plans, always with a stiff air, but the hostility of the past had softened. In the city that both of them now called home, Henry and Lindsay walked forward hand in hand. They were no longer a makeshift union forced by debts or illusions. Instead, they formed a partnership that defied cynicism, a partnership choosing honesty over power plays, love over fear. Late one afternoon, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, they revisited the place where they first bickered over a toppled perfume bottle. The hotel foyer still sparkled, but everything felt different. She smiled at him with affection, remembering how the smallest decisions, like saving one another from security, led to the biggest changes in both their lives. He squeezed her hand softly in return, as if to say, "Let's keep moving forward, always together." And so they did, leaving behind the swirling illusions of the past, stepping out into the vivid promise of a new day, like the final note of a perfect fragrance, lingering in the air, quietly telling a story of hope. If you found this story interesting, please subscribe so you won't miss other interesting stories, and if you enjoyed it, press the like button. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in Lindsay's shoes?